Clemson, who was 9-1 against the SEC, not named Bama. So my takeaway today is I do think Notre Dame loses kind of big, but I see it as such a great year for Notre Dame. That's my perspective. Your thoughts?
Yeah, listen, I agree with you. And I think too often in college football, we set the standard as just Bama or Clemson. And if you're not at that standard, you're no good. And I would argue that that's not a good spot to be in for the sport overall. I think Notre Dame has had a terrific year. They really have. They've overcome some injuries. I know their defense has played, I think, better than they have in the past. They're more physical. I think Ian Book has had a good year. Heck, they beat Clemson. I don't care who wasn't on the field for Clemson in that ball game. They won. And I got to tell you, I think that they might play better than people expect, because for me, they're just kind of pit into a corner. No one giving them any shot. All the accolades going on to Alabama, all the All-Americans and the Heisman finalists and everything. Wouldn't shock me at all if Notre Dame came out and played really hard and this was a closer game than people expect.
Let me talk about Clemson, Ohio State. I think this is competitive. I don't love Clemson's offensive line, except for the left tackle. He's really good. But the rest of the offensive line, I've seen them in spots. They get pushed around a little bit. They're not dominating. And I do think Chase Young's not there. They don't have the alpha this year, the dominating player, but they've got NFL bodies. I think this is kind of ugly, choppy. I don't think it's as dynamic. I think Trevor Lawrence feels a lot of pressure. My gut is that Clemson wins, but I think Ohio State, I think they have a lot of advantages. I think Clemson could be looking to Bama. I think Clemson's coach poked Ohio State in the ribs.
Yeah,
I think it's close today. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think it's close. And I'm going to pick Clemson. I think it's really they just have the better quarterback. And I know Fields is very good, and we might talk about him in a moment, but he's not playing near the level of what Trevor Lawrence is playing right now. And so for that reason, and the way that the secondary for Ohio State has played this season, I think Lawrence might have a big game. Now, having said that, you're exactly right about the Clemson offensive line. It's one of the reasons why they've had to be so creative in the way that they get the ball to Travis Etienne during the course of the year. In fact, during the Miami game way earlier in the season, in the first half, in order to get him more touches, they threw him 8 screen passes just in the first half, 8 different screen passes. So they've got to create ways for him to be effective. One of the ways that they create to be effective in the run game is letting Trevor Lawrence run the football. And remember, in the second half last year in that semifinal game, Lawrence's legs were really the difference in the game. That structure of defense that Ohio State plays, and it's somewhat unique because they play with 3 corners on the field and only 1 safety. But because of that middle closed single safety look that they play with almost on every snap, they are susceptible to the quarterback run. Lawrence was able to exploit that late in the game in that game last year, and that's what got everything going for them. I think that they might go quarterback run early, try to get some big plays and explosive plays in that run game and try to open some things up. I think Clemson wins the games, but you're exactly right. That front 7 for Ohio State, that's the key. If the secondary can eliminate explosive plays and put the game in the hands of the front 7, that's going to be Ohio State's best chance.
Listen, I think occasionally you get an Elway and Andrew Luck, a Trevor Lawrence, and they're transcendent. They're going to succeed eventually. But I look at Justin Fields and I think, his success is going to depend largely on where he lands. Bad coach will struggle. But he the last 2 games I've watched him, he's not been very good. And I think timeout. NFL coaching is generally way better than college coaching. And I think some of this is COVID.
You think so? Wait. You think so?
Well, Spurrier bombed in the NFL. Saban struggled in the NFL.
Well, but I don't know if that means that they're not as good of coach. I think Ryan Day is one of the best quarterback coaches out there.
So what if Justin Fields struggles today? Am I to think, I'm not picking him. He's just struggling. What am I to say if he struggles?
That's a good question. And he has. You're exactly right. He struggled late down the stretch of the season. I think there's been a couple of different factors. First, I think he has pressed. I think that he wanted badly to win a Heisman Trophy and do all of the things that he came back to do and fought to get back on the field to do. And then you also had games in which he was totally depleted as far as his resources. Remember, he played Michigan State without 3 starting offensive linemen. He didn't have his head coach on the sideline, who's normally his play caller. Then in the Big Ten championship game, he was down his leading receiver, Chris Olave, the wide receiver coach, Brian Hartline. They weren't on the sideline. This team has played shorthanded the entire back half of the season, and I think that has been reflected in Fields' play. I think he's pressed because of that. If he stays within himself, he's very good, but he has, at least this year, shown a couple of things that worry me for the future. One, he holds the ball far too long, and he locks onto one receiver for far too long. That's going to have to change, and that's going to have to develop for him in the NFL because you just don't succeed doing that at the next level. He's immensely talented, there's no doubt. But I have heard whispers in the scouting arena that other quarterbacks are starting to gain traction and momentum as the guys that might be selected as the second quarterback off the board in next spring's NFL draft because of those struggles we're mentioning here from Fields in the back half of the year.
So, listen, I believe, and I've had a couple tips. I've made a couple calls to athletic directors I know, and they always take my call because of my great influence and reach.
That's right. A very big influence. Huge. Big J journalism. You are huge.
I'm like an avalanche of journalism. I just keep coming down the hill. So I've called these athletic directors, and I've proposed the idea that because of shortfalls economically in COVID, the answer is only an 8-team playoff. It generates hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion.
I love when you pass off my ideas as your own.
Okay.
I told you that in September.
Well, you suggested it. I didn't really buy it, and then I did my own homework. And then,
is that right? Is that right? Oh,
so you suggested this. You submitted to me it's possible, and I do think. And I called two athletic directors, and they're like, "He's probably right." So we regrettably had to admit you were probably right. So my point being, if it happens, everybody's going to say, "Oh, this is going to give Coastal Carolina, BYU, Cincinnati," and I said, "No, it's not." I said, "Here's the 8 teams that are going to dominate the college football playoff, and here they are. Clemson, Bama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Georgia, Notre Dame, Oregon, Florida. One, only Ryan Day, to me, would leave for the NFL. I think all 8 of these coaches are good, and they have a presence, and they can recruit, and they're not going anywhere. Saban may retire, but that's about it. So
yeah, I was just going to say, of those coaches, you may get Cristobal out of Oregon if there's a big enough job in the SEC. And then you may have Ryan Day go to the NFL.
Yes.
And I don't think in 5 years Nick Saban's the head coach at Alabama. I think that head coach is going to be Steve Sarkisian, their offensive coordinator. I think I believe they've agreed for him to be coach in waiting already.
Wow.
And that he's just waiting for Nick Saban here in the next 2 or 3 years. But back to your list. I don't disagree, except for maybe one. Let me just push back on one. And I understand, and you talk about the avalanche of criticism when I'm going to bring up this next program. I would replace Florida with Texas. And the reason is because I don't buy the culture at Florida. And the evidence was 2 nights ago.
Bad.
When Dan Mullen and that team should be ashamed of the effort that was on the field. At some point, and remember, this is a guy a few years ago that went on that rant in a press conference about, you play for the Gators and the guy next to you and you got to have some pride. Well, where was the pride 2 nights ago? It was nowhere to be found. I don't care who wasn't on the field. The guys that were on the field gave a lackluster at best effort. I would borderline call it, a pathetic effort from Florida in that game. So I don't know about the long-term culture at Florida. I do know that the recruiting at Texas, and more specifically, Colin, that true freshman running back, Bijan Robinson, is unbelievable. And if they start giving him the ball 15, 20 times a game next year, watch out. And they've recruited at a high level. Tom keeps his job. They can retain some of that momentum. They'll be in the second year of offensive coordinator Mike Yurcich. They'll be in the second year of defensive coordinator Chris Ash, who has made them a much better defense. I would replace Florida with Texas on that list.
All right. I'm rooting for that because I do like some geographical symmetry, and I think the sport leans too far to the south, even though, I watch SEC every week, so I'm not complaining about it, but I just think the reality of our jobs is we need SC to be good. We need Texas to be good. It's good when Notre Dame's good. It's good when Ohio State and the Big Ten are good. It balances.
And we need a West Coast presence, by the way.
Yeah.
We're desperate for a West Coast presence, whether that's Oregon or USC. And the problem is that league has gone out there in bowl season and just gotten absolutely obliterated.
By the way, let's go back to this. Are you sure you suggested there'll be an 18 playoff, or did I suggest it to you?
I said to you almost verbatim. I said to you almost verbatim that the reason that the playoff is going to expand and soon is monetarily. It's not about fairness or who gets in or who doesn't get in. But when you have a budget shortfall somewhere between 40 and 65% across college football, the only money tree in the sport is expanding the playoff. You know, your parents always said, like, hey, there's not a money tree in the backyard. Well, for college football, there is, and it's called expanding the playoff, because our network and any other network will be clamoring to try to pay for those games, to air those games, because they're the most meaningful games. And so that, in order to recoup some of the money lost through COVID and not having fans in the stands, they're going to have to expand the playoff just for that reason alone.
All right, I'll acknowledge it. It may have been your idea first, but I think my expansive commentary on it after was quite interesting.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't disagree. You're most interesting man in sports radio and television for that.
Okay. Happy holidays to the amazing Joel Klatt.